There is a sensation you cannot define, cannot touch, yet it can make your heart race, your hands tremble, and your mind blur into a strange haze. It is not love, and not quite desire, but the first whisper of something deeper, quieter, and perhaps more terrifying. You may have felt it when you locked eyes with a stranger on the street, when a dream replayed something you couldn't name, or when a powerful emotion surged through your chest and you were too afraid to speak it aloud. This is the beginning of desire, a silent yet intense energy, an underground current that most of us spend our lives trying to control, ignore, or suppress. From religion, education, to family, we are taught to restrain ourselves, to master our urges, to live properly, but no one tells us what happens when desire is buried for too long. No one teaches us how to listen to it without losing ourselves. Freud once said that what is pushed into the unconscious does not die, it returns. In dreams, in panic attacks, or in mistakes we can't explain. Jung went further. He believed that desire is not merely a biological impulse, but a part of the journey back to the self, where you must face the shadow, the unformed, the denied parts of who you are. This writing is a journey, not to make you act differently, but to help you see differently, not to repress or indulge, but to understand and navigate. We will walk through the deeper layers of psychoanalysis, listen to stories of those who dared to face desire, and above all, seek a rhythm of living in which desire is no longer something to fear, but a voice to be heard. Have you ever asked yourself, what is the feeling I've been burying? And if I listened to it, just once, what would happen? 1. Psychoanalytic perspective. Freud. There is an invisible force that governs our behavior, thoughts, and even our most secret dreams, desire, but instead of being seen as a vibrant source of life energy, modern society, with its moral codes and idealized images, treats desire like an uninvited guest, repressed, rejected, and labeled with words like sinful, taboo, immoral. That is why, to understand desire and, beyond that, to understand ourselves, we need a psychological map. And Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, gave humanity such a map. According to Freud, the human mind is not a unified block. It is divided into 3 layers: the id, the ego, and the superego. These 3 structures do not coexist peacefully. They are in constant, silent conflict, a war that plays out every day, every hour, every moment we face a craving, a stranger's gaze, or a strange midnight dream. The id is the deepest and most primal layer. It knows no right or wrong, cares nothing for consequences, and is not governed by reason. If desire were an electric current, then the id is the raw, powerful source, where all primal urges arise: lust, hunger, gratification, possession. It is the child in us screaming, I want this, and I want it now. The ego, which lies in the middle, is the realistic mediator. It knows that not everything is allowed, that the world has rules. People have limits, and society has morals. The ego doesn't want to break all the boundaries, but it also cannot completely silence desire. So the ego seeks compromise. I want that, but I had to find a reasonable way to attain it. The superego is the strict supervisor. It has no desire, only principles. It is shaped by parents, schools, religion, culture, all the external voices that once taught us right from wrong, morality, and honor. When the id rises, the superego reprimands it with a cold voice. That's wrong. You are a bad person. You should be ashamed. And so, every time desire emerges, an inner trial is set in motion. The id is the defendant, the superego the prosecutor, the ego the judge. This trial is never silent. It causes tension, torment, and confusion, and if unrecognized, it can erupt as outbursts, irrational behavior, strange dreams, or even neurosis. Freud believed that not everyone is conscious enough to observe this war. Most of us live in the unconscious, allowing the superego to suppress the id and the ego to spin endlessly between punishment and desire. But what's most terrifying is this: repressed desire does not disappear. It hides deep in the unconscious, silently directing our behavior in indirect ways, like a serpent beneath the grass, waiting for a moment of weakness to strike. However, Freud did not only diagnose, he offered a door to healing, sublimation. This is the process of transforming raw desire into a higher form of expression, such as art, creativity, scholarship, or even compassion. A poet may write feverish verses from an unfulfilled love. A painter may pour longing onto an abstract canvas. A scientist may immerse himself in research to escape the pull of unmet urges. Sublimation doesn't eliminate desire, it reshapes it, turns it into fuel for life, into a drive for greatness. In doing so, a person is no longer the victim of instinct, but its conductor, not through violence, but through creativity, compassion, and intelligence. In Freud's view, every individual carries within them a wellspring of sexual energy, libido, not merely for reproduction, but as life force, the drive to learn, to build, to exist, and to love. When that energy flows in the right direction, it sustains us. When it's blocked, it floods and destroys. So instead of escaping or suppressing desire, Freud invites us to listen to it wisely. Ask yourself, what am I truly craving? Why does this scare me? Can I transform it into something more beautiful? 2. The deep psychoanalytic perspective, Jung. If Freud charted the map of the conscious and personal unconscious, Carl Jung took that vision into a more mystical dimension, the collective unconscious, a realm that holds ancient archetypes, universal symbols of the human psyche, and streams of energy beyond everyday logic. In Jung's world, desire is not merely a biological impulse, it is the language of the soul, the whisper of the shadow, and a doorway to inner wholeness. According to Jung, each person does not only have an ego, but also a shadow. The shadow is the part of the psyche that has been denied, hidden, labeled as bad or unacceptable. And paradoxically, desire often lives within this shadow. Cravings that have been repressed because of morality, dogma, or fear don't disappear. They are pushed into the darker corners of the soul. There, they don't die, but transform into a living shadow, always waiting for a chance to surface. Have you ever felt confused by an attraction toward someone you shouldn't be attracted to? Had strange dreams full of sexual or violent symbols? Found yourself unexpectedly stirred by a voice, a glance, or a scene in a film? That is not a fault. That is the shadow calling, a call that does not speak in logic but in symbols. Jung believed, what provokes you most is often what you have not yet accepted within yourself. And because of that, desire is not something to be destroyed, it must be interpreted. Just like a dream is interpreted, in Jungian psychoanalysis, desire is not only tied to instinct, it also carries the imprint of archetypes like anima and animus. These are psychological representations of the feminine in men and the masculine in women. When a man feels an overwhelming attraction toward a woman, it may not be because she is his ideal, but because she awakens a forgotten inner image of feminine energy, his anima. Conversely, a woman may be magnetized by a masculine figure, not because he is perfect, but because he mirrors her animus. The fascinating truth is, when we are unaware of what's missing in our soul, we unconsciously seek it in others. We don't love them, we love the lost piece of our own soul that we see in them. But if we are not awake, this can lead to idealization, dependence, or deep disappointment when the illusion dissolves. Jung never suggested rejecting the anima or animus. He encouraged their integration. Instead of chasing feminine energy out in the world, a man must connect with the softness, intuition, and emotional depth within himself. Instead of admiring masculinity only in others, a woman must reclaim her own inner firmness, clarity, and will to act. When this happens, desire is no longer an outward chase. It becomes a homecoming of the soul. Jung wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This holds true for desire. When we do not dare to look at our buried cravings, they return in uncontrolled forms through obsession, toxic relationships, or decisions that seem random but are actually driven by the unconscious. Thus, Jung proposed a different path: dialogue with the shadow. Ask your desire, what are you here to tell me? What forgotten part of me do you represent? The answer may not come in words, but through intuition, through dreams, through vague feelings. But if you are quiet enough, honest enough, you will hear it. For Jung, desire is the raw material of the individuation process, the lifelong journey to become whole. And on that path, desire is no longer the enemy. It becomes the guide. It no longer pulls you away from yourself. it draws you closer to your core. Free. The reflection of desire in popular culture. If psychoanalysis is a microscope into the structure of the human psyche, then popular culture is its vivid mirror, projecting those very impulses onto screens, pages, and canvases. What people do not dare to say aloud, they express through characters, symbols, and stories. In that realm, desire is not censored, it is allowed to burn, to erupt, even to destroy. Through this, we recognize that we are living within the very symbols we once thought were merely entertainment. Look at Greek mythology, where gods, despite their omnipotence and immortality, are still governed by deeply human desires. Zeus, the supreme god, is not depicted as a moral ideal, but as a living emblem of uncontrollable erotic drive. He loves, he possesses, he betrays, and from each pursuit of passion, a new god, a new hero, or a new tragedy is born. Here, desire is not hidden, it creates, destroys, and reshapes destiny. The question is no longer, is it wrong? But what do we do when confronted with such powerful forces inside ourselves? These myths do not die with time, they simply wear new costumes in cinema, literature, painting, and modern music. A film like Eyes Wide Shut, Stanley Kubrick, is not merely a tale of a husband wandering into a secret world of sex. It is a journey into the shadow, where repressed desire becomes ritual, mask, and power play. Behind the explicit imagery lies a deeper question. What is it in me I dare not confront? And how is it driving me? Or Black Swan, a film where art and desire intertwine through the life of a ballerina. Nina, she longs for perfection, but that perfection is not in technique, it is in touching the repressed, animalistic side of herself. Desire, unacknowledged and suppressed, manifests as violence, hallucination, and the disintegration of identity. And when she finally reaches the pinnacle of her artistic expression, her psyche collapses, a cruel price, yet also a form of enlightenment. For art to be true, desire must not be killed, it must be embodied. In music, desire appears in many forms, from soft love ballads to burning rhythms. All are indirect confessions. The singer does not say, "I crave you," but sings, "I can't stop thinking about you at night." Music becomes a socially acceptable space for emotions that, in daily life, may be labeled weak, crude, or sinful, but it is exactly that which allows listeners to see themselves in the lyrics, for everyone carries a part of themselves that longs to be understood through melody. Even in fairy tales or animation, seemingly innocent domains, desire operates in silence. The Little Mermaid is not merely a children's love story, it symbolizes the yearning to transcend one's limitations, to trade her voice for legs in order to access another world. Even at the cost of pain, she does not only long for the prince, she longs to become her truest self, even if that means sacrifice and solitude. Popular culture, in the end, does not create desire, it simply stages it without judgment, and this makes it a diagnostic tool for society. When a film, a song, or a novel becomes beloved, ask, what is it awakening in us? Which part of the shadow is it helping us dialogue with? Not everyone is ready to face their desire in real life, but when we sit in a theater, play a song, or flip through a comic, we are allowed, just for a moment, to be real. In a safe space, and that is when the shadow is seen, desire is named, and healing can begin, quietly, but deeply. 4. Desire repressed by culture, family, religion. Not everyone grows up with a neutral view of desire. In fact, most of us were raised in environments where desire was something to avoid, conceal, or even condemn, and the cost of this suppression is not just personal suffering, but a collective, smoldering condition called abandoned unconsciousness. From a young age, the child learns a simple yet deeply consequential lesson: some emotions must not be expressed. When they ask about their body, adults stay silent. When they show curiosity about gender differences, adults change the subject. When they feel a flutter towards someone, adults give them a stern look. You're too young. Don't think such thoughts. And so, drop by drop, repressed feelings, unfinished questions, and sealed curiosity form a hidden stream within the soul, a current of desire disconnected from conscious awareness. This is the beginning of the shadow. In cultures heavily shaped by religious or traditional morality, Sexuality is often equated with sin, virginity is elevated as a moral standard, while desire, instead of being recognized as a natural part of the self, is seen as a sign of fallenness or corruption. As a result, many adults carry an invisible shame whenever they feel attracted, aroused, or simply yearn to be touched and held. Religion, when interpreted rigidly, becomes a double-edged sword. On one hand, it points toward discipline, purification, and noble ideals, but on the other, if it splits the soul from the body, the sacred from the sensual, then everything tied to instinct gets labeled impure, tempting, or damning, and from there, the human being falls into a deep inner conflict between the desire to live faithfully and the inability to fully suppress their natural impulses. In Eastern traditions, generations of women have grown up inside the mold of the dutiful wife and mother, meek, self-restrained, and never too free. Meanwhile, men are bound to ideals of strength and rationality, where tenderness and vulnerability, especially affectionate desire, are off limits. Desire, in any form, must wear the armor of morality and only exist within the socially acceptable boundaries. But the soul doesn't know how to wear armor, it only knows how to whisper. And then, when society enters the so-called liberated age, many think that talking freely and living boldly equals freedom, but external openness does not mean internal reconciliation. Some sleep with many partners yet have never truly touched their own being. Some speak casually about sex but deep down still feel guilty when they truly experience desire. This is the tragedy of generations caught between the control of the past and the pressure of modernity. We live in a society where the body is displayed, but the psyche is hidden, where everyone is liberating themselves, yet few truly know what they long for. And this raises a question: how do we distinguish between authentic desire and socially conditioned imitation? Between a craving born from the soul's depth and a mechanical reaction to media stimuli? The answer, as Jung often emphasized, does not lie in eliminating desire, but in dialoguing with it. Sit down and ask yourself honestly, where does this desire come from? Is it the call of a neglected part of me, or an echo of some foreign expectation? This is not easy work, but only when you dare to face the origin of your desire can you begin the journey back to the self. For desire, when misunderstood, becomes a chain, but when recognized, accepted, and transformed, it becomes a force of creativity, connection, and awakening. 5. Desire and guilt, the beginning of inner wounding. There is a kind of wound that doesn't come from the outside world but starts from within, when we feel guilty for the most natural parts of ourselves. Desire, whether physical, emotional, or a longing for connection, should have been a call from life itself. But when it becomes entangled with shame, guilt, and a sense of unworthiness, it stops being a refreshing stream and turns into a toxic underground current, silently corroding the inner structure of the self. Guilt doesn't always have a name. It doesn't knock loudly. It arrives in a lowered gaze, in avoiding someone's eyes, in a dream that leaves you waking up with a vague sense of wrongness. It lives in offhand thoughts like, I shouldn't feel this way. I'm disgusting. If anyone knew what I'm thinking, they'd leave me. And so, every time desire arises, another part of you rises with it, the part that wants to suppress. The part that says you are wrong. Psychology calls this the conflict between instinct and superego, the pull from the shadow and the screaming from a moral megaphone installed since childhood. Carl Jung called this a division of the soul, when part of you is exiled from consciousness and becomes the shadow. Do you remember the first time you felt ashamed of your own desire? Maybe it was when you felt stirred by a glance, a dim light, a touch that seemed accidental, but instead of listening to that feeling, you tried to push it away. You looked away. You told yourself, I shouldn't feel this. And from that moment on, something was buried, not gone, but quietly taking root. Suppression creates wounding not because desire is wrong, but because we tear ourselves in two. One half wants to live, the other half wants to punish. One side yearns to touch and be understood. The other side warns, take one more step, and you'll lose everything. This internal battle exhausts people to the point of collapse, often leading to depression, anxiety, or self-harming behaviors. Freud once wrote, wherever there is repressed libido, there will be symptoms. That's why some people become irritable, overly sensitive, or emotionally numb, because the energy of desire, when not allowed to flow naturally, begins to leak through the cracks in the psyche. And what leaks out isn't just sexual tension, it's the belief that one is worthy of life, worthy of feeling, worthy of being. Worse still, guilt creates separation. You feel different, perverted, alone. You look at others and wonder, why do they seem happy, comfortable in their bodies and emotions, while I carry this shameful secret? And in that isolation, a deeper wound is formed, the wound of identity. When someone lives too long believing they're wrong, forbidden, they gradually disconnect from the most alive part of themselves. They laugh because others laugh. They love because someone said that's what love is. They live, but without touching the true urges that rise from within. That is no longer living. That is existing in silence, where desire becomes a guilty secret, and the self becomes a prisoner under its own censorship. So they wear a mask. They appear normal. They work, marry, raise children, but somewhere in the night, when all is quiet, they hear that voice again. Softly, like the wind, like a shiver, like a nameless dream. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Guilt does not go away through denial. It heals only when you face it and ask, what am I feeling guilty for? And is it truly wrong, or is it a punishment someone once taught me to carry? You don't have to rush, but you can begin. Begin by forgiving yourself. Begin by listening. Begin by stopping the habit of calling yourself guilty simply for having the feelings of a human being. 6. Transformation through creativity, the healthiest path. There is a truth few dare to admit. Desire never disappears. You can hide it, you can try to forget, but you cannot kill a life force that is innately encoded within you. The more you suppress it, the more it erupts in distorted and uncontrollable ways. The issue is not desire itself. The issue is how you choose to use it. In psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud opened a deeply human and realistic path: sublimation, the process of transforming instinctual energy, especially sexual energy, into positive, creative, and socially beneficial actions. According to Freud, this is the highest form of instinctual maturity, a way for the ego to bring the shadow into the light without needing to destroy it. Simply put, creativity is the bridge between raw desire and human expression. A painter does not merely apply color to canvas. He is painting the deepest regions of the soul, where longing, pain, and yearning come together in imagery. A writer is not just telling stories. He is opening the gates of the unconscious, allowing parts of the self that have never been fully lived to find a voice. You may not be a professional artist, but you have the ability to create beauty. You have the capacity to transform what you repress into something that moves the world. When you write a journal entry filled with your rawest emotions, you are healing. When you arrange flowers, cook a meal, compose a melody, dance alone in your room, you are allowing your inner life force to breathe, to flow in ways that harm no one, not even yourself. The question is, do you allow yourself to live creatively, or do you still believe it's a luxury reserved for artists? The truth is, creativity is a natural instinct. It existed before you could write, before you could even name your desire. A child colors not to become a painter, but to speak what they don't yet have words for. So why do adults forget this? Carl Jung went further than Freud. For him, creativity was not just a sophisticated defense mechanism, but a sacred process, where the self becomes whole, where the subconscious meets consciousness and gives birth to symbols. When you paint an abstract image, vague but compelling, it could be your shadow speaking. When you write a strange short story, it might be a hidden part of your psyche taking form. Jung called this the process of individuation, the journey to becoming fully oneself. Through the reconciliation of inner light and shadow, and desire, when transformed properly, becomes the raw material for that process. Look at the masterpieces of art, literature, cinema, and music. Behind them are souls full of longing and conflict. Behind a powerful symphony is a heart that has broken. Behind a haunting play is someone who has faced a fear no one else knew. And the remarkable thing is, they did not lock desire in the dark. They used it to create light. Of course, creativity is not magic. It doesn't make desire disappear, but it gives desire a path, a stream, a form of expression that harms no one And that expression is the first step toward truly understanding yourself. Instead of fearing yourself, you can begin with simple things: a free writing page each morning, an improvised melody, an unedited poem, a pencil sketch without meaning. It doesn't need praise. It doesn't need to be beautiful. It doesn't need to be shared. It only needs to be honest. Honest with your own desire. Honest with the fear of being judged for it. And then, you'll see, beneath every so-called sinful craving, there may be a child who only wants to be loved, understood, and allowed to live, and creativity, more than any other form, is the gentlest way for that child to step out. Be held and be reborn. 7. A practical path. When desire is heard, it ceases to be a threat. We've spoken at length about what unfolds in the deep layers of the psyche. But if we can't bring it to the surface, if it doesn't help you breathe easier in daily life, then all this understanding is nothing more than beautiful but useless theory. So, how do we live with desire without being controlled by it? How do we shift from suppression to regulation, from fear to dialogue? The answer doesn't lie in controlling it with willpower. Every attempt to restrain desire through prohibition only pushes it deeper, distorts it further, and makes it more dangerous. Like a river blocked by a dam, it will eventually either burst through or seep out in ways no one can predict or control. What we need isn't a dam, we need a channel. Step 1. Observe, don't judge. When desire arises, whether it's a passing sensation, a strange fantasy, or an image that makes your heart race, don't immediately label it as wrong or right. Pause, breathe, ask yourself, what am I feeling? What color does this feeling have? Where in my body is it showing up? The moment you pause and observe, the wave won't sweep you away like before. It's still there, but this time, you're the one seeing it, not blindly reacting to it. Step 2. Write it down. Write with honesty, without editing. Sometimes, a short journal entry after an intense emotional wave reveals layers of the self you've never seen before. Writing isn't for venting, it's for dialogue with yourself. To understand that you are not strange, not shameful, you are simply human, and you are listening to your inner being speak. Step 3. Ask smart questions. What kind of desire just arose in me? What does it really want? Am I missing a certain type of connection? Is there something in me that has never been seen or acknowledged? When you ask these questions with kindness, you'll realize desire is not a wild beast, it's a messenger. It's here to tell you that a part of you is longing to live. Step 4. Transform it. One of the most powerful ways to soothe desire isn't to extinguish it, but to redirect it. You can paint, write poetry, practice yoga, play music, and dance, or simply tidy up your living space with the clear intention: I am giving this energy a space to flow. The activity itself doesn't matter. What matters is that you do it with awareness of the desire within. That's when you become the navigator, not the one being swept away. Step 5. Set boundaries consciously. Desire is fire. It can warm or it can burn. That's why learning to recognize and respect boundaries, yours and others, is essential. Don't view boundaries as repression. See them as a hearth that contains the flame, so it burns steady, not wild. Ask yourself, what aligns with my values? What boundaries allow me to be myself, not what others expect? Step 6. Dare to talk about desire. We live in a world where people talk about everything except the things that matter most, like longing, loneliness, and desire. If you're in a relationship, open the door to honest conversation. Ask, how do you feel when we talk about desire? Is there anything you've never said but have always wanted to share? These questions won't ruin your connection. They're the very beginning of a real one. And finally, seek professional support when needed. There are fears you cannot unravel alone. There are suppression patterns rooted in childhood. A therapist, especially one familiar with depth psychology, can help you revisit the past, reshape your perception, and learn to speak to your own desire. Going to therapy doesn't mean you're broken. It means you've been silent for too long. You don't need to be enlightened to begin. You just need one thing: courage. Courage to listen to the whisper you've always ignored. Courage to touch the part of yourself that's been silenced for years and say, "Dead, I'm not afraid of you anymore. I want to understand you." Because if desire is the door to shadow, then awareness is the light in your hand. 8. A character's story. When someone dares to face desire instead of burying it, To conclude this theoretical journey, perhaps nothing is more practical than a true story, a path from running away to understanding. The character in this story isn't a stranger. She could be you, she could be me, she could be anyone who has ever lived on the fragile edge between longing and fear, between what one wants to do and what one is allowed to do. Let's call her Mai, a 32-year-old woman, educated, with a stable job, and an exterior so composed it seemed nothing could stir her. But beneath that calm surface lived another world, a place where emotions, desires, and repressed images were screaming silently. Mai grew up in a traditional and strict family. Anything related to sexuality, the body, or emotions was deemed sensitive, in other words, not to be spoken of. Everything had to be proper, clean, and appropriate. So from a young age, Mai learned to bury her true feelings and replace them with controlled silence. She never dared to admit to anyone, not even herself, that there were nights she dreamed of someone's gentle touch, of glances that made her heart race, of fantasies never taught in school books. And every time it happened, she felt guilty, she blamed herself, she retreated back into the role of the ideal woman she believed society expected her to be. Then, unexpectedly, the cracks began to form. It happened after watching a film. There was nothing overtly sexual in it. No steamy love scenes, no irresistibly seductive characters, but there was one look exchanged between the two protagonists, a quiet, fleeting moment that made her burst into tears. She didn't understand why. The tears fell in silence, in a living room where it was just her and the screen. But from that moment, she knew something inside her had awakened. Mai sought out a therapist, not to be fixed, but to understand herself, session by session, question by question. Every silence held gently in between. She began to touch the dark corners of her psyche, where desire had been buried, where longing had been mislabeled, where past awakenings had been shut down out of fear of losing her virtue. She slowly came to realize desire wasn't her enemy. It only became dangerous when suppressed, denied, and labeled as dirty. She began to rewrite her inner narrative. She stopped judging her feelings with the labels of good or bad. Instead, she learned to listen, and through that listening, she learned to transform. She began to paint, not to become an artist, but to create a safe space to express herself. Her first paintings were full of reds, blacks, and grays, as if her internal chaos was pouring out in lines and colors. But gradually, the hues lightened, became calmer. She said, "I don't feel dirty anymore. I feel alive." She also started to be more honest in her relationships. When in love, she no longer tried to get it right. She allowed herself to say, "I want to be closer," or "I need some space." She learned to express her needs without apologizing for them. Not everyone understood her. Some thought she had changed, rebelled, but from that transformation, she met people who were more real, people who were also learning how to live authentically. No more masks, no more roles. Today, Mai is still a quiet woman, but her eyes no longer carry the gaze of someone running from herself. They carry the gaze of someone who has walked into her own darkness and returned with light. Mai's story isn't a fairy tale ending. It's a process still unfolding, but in each of her steps lies a message, quiet yet powerful. When you dare to face desire, it no longer haunts you. It becomes the most alive part of you, the part you once abandoned out of fear. And perhaps, your story is also waiting to be rewritten, not with another act of repression, but with the first time you dare to ask yourself, honestly, what am I truly longing for, and is it worth living more fully for? There are things that, if you keep repressing them long enough, will become distorted. Desire is one of them. It is not evil, but when rejected, it finds a way to reappear in forms no one expects: emotional coldness, inexplicable anger, impulsive decisions, or even untraceable waves of depression, not because desire hurts you, but because you never gave it a place to live. We've walked together through Freud, with his deep layers of repressed instincts, through Jung, with his shadow and symbolic unconscious, through the stories of those who dared to live truthfully with their desire, and through practical tools to channel that energy in a healthy direction. But beneath all of it, the true message of this reflection is simple. Desire does not need to be controlled, it needs to be heard. Imagine if you viewed desire as a bell, not something to be silenced, but something to listen to. It's a signal that a part of you is longing to be more alive. That part may be craving closeness, or creativity, or authentic connection, or the deep sense of being fully present in your body, your soul, and your emotions. And you know what? When you stop running from desire, you stop running from yourself. You step out of the performance. You touch the most primal layer of your being, the place where you are not judged, not labeled, not required to be right in order to be loved. You only need to be real. That is when desire stops being a haunting shadow and becomes a source of life. So in the end, the question isn't whether desire is right or wrong, but rather, are you ready to listen to its call and walk through the door you've never dared to open?